Namaste and greetings. I, Bhanvi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, प्रभाव एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on cities and the Union Budget 2023 to 2024. This discussion is organized by the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies as a part of IMPRI #Web Policy Talk series, The State of Cities #Cities Conversations. This discussion is a part of IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget financial year 2023-24 being organized from February 2 to 7, 2023. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Our chair and moderator for today's discussion is Dr. Rumi Aijaz, Senior Fellow and Head, Urban Policy Research Initiative, Observer Research Foundation, India. And moderator for today's discussion is Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, Associate Professor, Visva Bharati, Santi Niketan, Visiting Senior Fellow, IMPRI. We welcome you, sir. The panelists for today are Professor Chetan Vaidya, Independent Urban Advisor, former Director, School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and National Institute of Urban Affairs, New Delhi. Professor Vishwanathalok, Professor of Public Finance, Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi. Mr. T. Chakravarti, Urban Economist. Professor Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, Professor of Urban Management and Governance, Xavier University, Bhubaneswar. Professor Mahalya Chatterjee, Professor, Center for Urban Economic Studies, Department of Economics, University of Calcutta. Professor Kala Sitaram Sridhar, Professor, Center for Research in Urban Affairs, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. Mr. Tarun Sharma, Co-founder, Nagrika. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay to start the program. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vanavi, and good afternoon to all of you from Shanti Niketan. And on behalf of the Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, I welcome you all to this thematic deliberation on cities and Union Budget 2023-24. And we know that the Indian cities are becoming increasingly important as growth centers more than ever before. And the city governments will be important for strengthening local economy, for improving the investment climate and increasing the productivity and competitiveness of local businesses, entrepreneurs and workers. And we know also that these cities are facing an array of challenges as population continues to grow and urbanize. Serious infrastructural and governance deficits are almost all pervasive. There are climate change induced risk, and India's commitment to net zero emissions and its climate goal, which is committed in COP27, necessitates investment in green planning and in creating more sustainable urban settlements. And COVID-19 also had underscored the need for upgrading the urban health infrastructure and the disaster management response system to improve our cities' resilience. Just I was looking at the recent 2022 World Bank studies, which mentions that our cities need an investment of $840 billion over the next 15 years. And also the latest RBI report on municipal finance, which came out last year, it has underscored the importance of urban governance reforms and the financial autonomy of the city governments. And the government recognized the importance of addressing these challenges and placed a strong emphasis on urban development in the last year's budget. And we expected that the cities in India continue to be a key focus of this year's budgets, including some specific emphasis on urban planning and transformation to improve the quality of life, to enable sustainable development and economic growth. And from the budget announcement, it seems that there is emphasis on building sustainable cities for tomorrow with a roadmap for infrastructure financing and governance reforms. For example, there is a provision for setting up of 10,000 crore per year urban infrastructure development fund for creating urban infrastructure in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, and reforms in property tax governance and also ring fencing and visa charges are also mentioned. And this budget has also announced incentive for improving the credit worthiness of the city governments. But what this means for Indian cities and its citizens, and how far these roadmaps would facilitate the desired urban transformation, and what are the implications for sustainable planning, infrastructure development, improvement in city competitiveness, creation of employment opportunities, and so on. So these are some of the very important, crucial issues. And we are very much fortunate to have with us some of the leading urban experts in our country. So with these few words, may I now request Dr. Rumi Aijaz to chair this session and to take charge of this discussion. It's over to you, Dr. Aijaz.
Thank you, Dr. Soumyadip. That was, you've drawn a very accurate landscape, which simplifies things for me. You've rightly highlighted the challenges that are being witnessed in the cities of the country. So I join you in extending my warm greetings to the distinguished speakers and all the participants in this program. And I would like to begin by saying that, like last year, the budgetary allocations for the urban sector have been provided in this year's budget document. And the main budgetary heads are the center's establishment expenditure, which basically means that the amount of money that the center would be spending in running their establishments, that is to say their secretariat, their offices, their autonomous organizations and attached offices like Delhi Urban Arts Commission and National Institute of Urban Affairs, or National Capital Region Planning Board and the Town and Country Planning Organization. So that's an important expenditure head described in the budget. The second important category is the central schemes and projects. And these are related to limited sectors such as the schemes for the development of the street vendors and for public health engineering development in the country. And the third main head is the centrally sponsored schemes. That is to say that the transfers that the central government would be making to the state governments and the union territories for the implementation of a series of ongoing centrally sponsored schemes. As we all know, these include Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana for urban areas. The second one is about the livelihood related aspects, livelihood mission. The third is the Amrut, or the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, and the Smart Cities Mission, and the Swachh Bharat Mission, the urban component of it. So these are the centrally sponsored schemes for which budgetary allocations have been provided. Now, from the budget document, I was able to draw the following inferences. And my observations are based on two aspects: the percentage of change that has occurred from last year, and the importance given to which urban sector, that is to say, which has been allocated a higher share or a relatively lesser share as compared to last year. And I'm looking at two sets of data which are provided in the budget document. One is the revised estimates for last year, 22-23, 2022-23, and the budget estimates for this year, this financial year, 23-24. So I would like to flag three important things that are emerging. One is that there is an overall increase in the budgetary amount, and this is up to 3% from when compared with the previous period. 3% increase in the net amount. The second aspect is the percentage increase is highest for Swachh Bharat Mission urban component and for Amrut. And you can, as you might have already seen, that the amount for Swachh Bharat Mission urban has doubled from what it was during the previous period. The next aspect is about the negative change or the decrease in the budgetary allocation in respect of schemes such as Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban and the Smart Cities Mission. So the amounts allocated to these two centrally sponsored schemes, PMAYU and SCM, Smart Cities Mission, have reduced when compared with last year. And finally, in the total budgetary estimate, that is to say the amount allocated for the urban sector, total amount for this year, 23-24, the share of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban component and metro rail projects that will be implemented in the country, their share is the highest when compared with other initiatives of the urban ministry. And their share is coming up to over 60% of the total amount allocated by the urban ministry. Certain interesting things are also observed from the speech delivered by the Honorable Finance Minister of India, and wherein there is an emphasis on sustainable cities. And an effort has been made to describe what all cities should do in order to create sustainable cities or in order to transform existing cities into or to make them sustainable. And in this respect, several aspects have been referred to again. The first is about the point related to transit-oriented development. We all know, we are from this background, what this means. And basically, the idea is to have development along corridors which are most frequently traveled by commuters on a day-to-day basis. The next aspect is about better utilization of existing land that exists in the urban areas of the country. The next point is about the resource mobilization. We all know that many municipalities in India and statutory organizations are faced by a resource crunch. And therefore, a strong message is being sent through the center that there is a need to strengthen the financial condition in order to achieve the goals or policies that have been mentioned in the budget and other documents. And this will be done through tools such as municipal bonds and creation of an urban infrastructure development fund. Now, the other important points that are mentioned under sustainable cities are use of artificial intelligence, green mobility, the introduction or the launch of the hydrogen mission in India, and the scientific management of solid waste. So, in a manner, the center is drawing the attention of state governments and union territories to attend to various sustainability aspects, to make cities more resilient, to make them financially and technically strong, is the message that's come out from the finance minister's speech. So for today's discussion, we thought that it would be interesting to look at what new does this recent budget provide in terms of any significant thing that was not happening in the past? When I look at it, most of the things have already been said since years. And also, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this budget? The second point is about whether this budget takes into consideration or takes into account the various challenges, as Dr. Soumyadip rightly pointed out, the various challenges that the country is confronted with. Have the needy areas been paid attention to? So I think these two aspects about the strengths, weaknesses, and the areas which have been overlooked, for instance, by the budget, could be some of the points that could be taken up for consideration in today's panel discussion. And with these brief remarks, I would like to invite Professor Kala Sitaram Sridhar, who is with the Institute of Social and Economic Change in Bangalore, to share with us her perceptions of the budget that has been announced by the central government. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rumi. I hope everybody is able to hear me clearly.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I thank IMPRI, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Soumyadip, Dr. Rumi, and for inviting me to this very interesting panel discussion, which is very, very timely and thoughtful. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel discussion with many other distinguished panelists. So now what I want to do is I want to draw attention to what Dr. Arjun Kumar just said a few minutes ago about the National Gati Shakti policy, which the Prime Minister Modi announced last October. So what I want to point out is that when we are looking at the budget, which is announced on February 1, typically now, that is only a partial statement of the government's policy priorities and goals. Because many other important policy announcements are made throughout the year. So I would like to use Dr. Arjun Kumar's example of the National Gati Shakti policy and how that resonates very well with some findings from our own research. In our research, actually, what we did was we looked at this phenomenon called as urban primacy, right? Urban primacy is a phenomenon by which when you look at an urban system, one single city is disproportionately large compared to the smaller cities or other cities in the urban system. If we have the severe urban primacy problem, both in Karnataka as well as Telangana. In Telangana, the newly carved state of Telangana, we have Hyderabad, which is basically 9 times, which Hyderabad is about 7 million as of census 2011. The second biggest city is Warangal, which is only 7 lakh. Okay, so Hyderabad is nearly 10 times the size of Warangal. In Karnataka, very similar problem exists. Bangalore is 8.5 times the size of Mysore. This is as of since 2011, and we find that this problem has gotten more severe in 2019 based on population estimates, right? So what we found was we did a study to understand urban primacy in Karnataka and also what prevents. See, now I think it's accepted that firms are the creators of jobs and employment opportunities across space, right? So we did a study of firms in Karnataka and about 10 additional cities in addition to Bangalore. And what we found was that the logistics and the supply chain is the biggest reason why firms don't want to locate in small and mid-tier cities. And only in large cities like Bangalore that Bangalore, Delhi, Chennai, Mumbai, Kolkata, that the infrastructure is somewhat acceptable. That's the reason why they don't locate in smaller cities. And that is why we have urban primacy. That's what we found. So now the Prime Minister announced this Gati Shakti in October 2022 to improve logistics. So that is an excellent way to reduce primacy by creating and spreading employment opportunities across space, right? By improving logistics. Because what we found in that study was very, very significant. We found that the firms are spending a lot more, several times more on operations and maintenance expenditure than they were on spending capital expenditure, right? That's a very significant finding and testifies to the poor state of logistic and supply chain infrastructure in our country. And the Prime Minister made this announcement of Gati Shakti in October 2022. This was not the budget. Okay, so that is my first point here. That budget is only a partial statement of policy priorities. Now, the second point I want to make about this budget is that I think Dr. Rumi rightly mentioned this, that I think this year the capital expenditure is about 3.3% of the country's GDP. Now, how do we basically compare this? What are the other benchmarks for us? See, in terms of infrastructure requirements, the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, found that across all regions of Asia, the Pacific leads, right? All the Fiji Islands and the small group of islands near New Zealand, right? They require infrastructure investments at 9% of GDP, right? And South Asia, so they require very high infrastructure investments. South Asia, according to this ADB report, in which India is included, South Asia needs 8.8% of GDP as infrastructure investment. So compare this to the 3.3% that our government has announced this time. So if we compare this to this benchmark, we still have a yawning gap of 5.5% of GDP, which is required additionally, in addition to whatever has been announced as infrastructure investment. So that's only one benchmark that I would like to point out. Now, I think Dr. Arjun Kumar said one thing very right, I think at the beginning, or I'm not sure if it was Dr. Soumyadip. I'm not sure who it was, but this budget, I mean, favors infrastructure. Definitely, it recognizes the importance of cities and sustainable cities for tomorrow, definitely. But I think there are some gaps. So what I found was that I think there is a lot of fillip to transport infrastructure, for which about 75,000 crores have been allocated. And also there are a lot of transport infrastructure projects for coal, steel, ports, fertilizers, which have been identified. And this definitely supports the idea of Make in India, right? And also facilitates manufacturing. There is no doubt about this. There's no second question. However, I think we still have a big challenge to phase out fossil fuels like coal. And this is a very big challenge because fossil fuels like coal are very cheap, right? And which is the reason why the urban poor use them the most. And that is one reason how we take the sustainability of the cities for tomorrow to the last person in the city, to the urban poor. So that is actually a very big challenge. And I think Dr. Rumi talked about transit-oriented development. Correct. So I think the finance minister emphasized systematic urban planning and also transit-oriented development. This touches really, I think, the heart of some of the most pressing problems our cities face, like including traffic congestion, housing affordability, because she also talked about land, right? But what is not clear to me is how will these challenges be eased? That is something that's not very clear, right? I mean, I do understand that urban development is a state subject over which the national government has no direct control. But I think the national government, because of the resources and skills to which they have access, they should provide some roadmap to the states to engage in systematic urban planning, especially because some of the development control rules and land use regulations followed in our cities are archaic, including building bylaws. These are all archaic, right? Now, I don't know how much of time I have, Dr. Rumi, maybe a couple more minutes, or am I done? I'm not very sure.
Yes, 2-3 minutes.
2-3 minutes? Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So now the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister also talked about the importance of municipal finances, property tax reforms to enable cities to improve their balance sheets and credit ratings so that they can access the bond market, which is really very well taken, where well-performing ones have an advantage. But we have been discussing this since the times of the JNNURM, the mandatory reforms. I'm sure Chetan will recall the mandatory reforms, optional reforms for cities. So how is this an improvement over that? That is my only limitation with that. And the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund, which Dr. Soumyadip and Dr. Rumi rightly emphasized, the states may leverage their 15th Finance Commission funds while accessing this UIDF, for which an outlay of only about 10,000 crore are basically set aside. 10,000 crore, see, we have about 7,000 cities and towns, and this is actually outdated as of 2011, but every city will get more than 1 crore. That's what this basically means, right? So this is basically very inadequate, but this is very good seed funding with which private investment and funding should be leveraged. Summarizing, I think that this is a very good budget in terms of its attempts to improve and increase investment in infrastructure, but it is well below international benchmarks. As I said, 1. 2 is that budget is not the only statement of policy priorities. 3, municipal finances, there are very, the recognition that municipal finances are weak and we need to improve their credit worthiness, but it's not anything new, and national governments should still handhold the state government significantly as far as this is concerned. One final thought regarding PMAY Urban, for which the allocation has been increased by to 79,000 crore, rising 66% from the previous year. But I still think that monetary challenge is an important one, but it's the only one, right? It's actually one of many other important challenges like timeliness, cost of construction, quality of construction. There's a cost overrun if the governance is poor, and also the house occupants' preferences should be taken into account. So let me just stop at this point. And one final point regarding data. A national data governance policy, which he announced, is very, very important, especially for cities and urban researchers. However, I emphasize that all these data from many sources should be consistent and should be periodically made available, right? We are just sitting here waiting for the next census to be done and the data to be made available, which is a really very, very long way from now. And if we believe in evidence-based policy making, this is no way we should be going as urban researchers. So to summarize then, I think the budget has started the right steps towards attaining a $5 trillion economy, maybe a $10 trillion economy in the next 10 years, but there is a long journey ahead. Thanks a lot. And I would like to stop at this point, and I'm open for any questions later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Kala. It was interesting to listen to your ideas and thoughts. And you're especially sharing your study about the urban primacy is important. I'm not too familiar with many institutions who are undertaking such relevant studies, very important. And the point that you mentioned about how the current flagship initiative of the Government of India offers a chance and an opportunity to address the gap that exists. We will certainly come back with the things that you discussed and presented. And I would like to request now, move on to the next panel speaker, Professor Chetan Vaidya, who has been associated with a number of organizations, including USAID, NIUA, School of Planning and Architecture. So over to you, Professor Vaidya, for your thoughts on this year's budget.
Thank you. You can hear me?
I can clearly.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So nice to see all of you here. And thank you, IMPRI, for this opportunity. Thank you, Soumyadip, for those introductory remarks and the background of both you and Kala. I think this is very good background for my points to be mentioned here. I will mention two things which needs to be emphasized more. Two things which have happened in this budget, which needs to be emphasized more. One is that the Finance Minister announced something called Namaste, National Action Plan for Mechanized Sanitation Ecosystem. I think Namaste. This amount is only 100 crores, but what they plan to do is provide financial support to 500 cities where this person going in the manhole and getting affected and sometimes also dying. We are talking about 300 deaths last year, and this is a very unfortunate thing, and we had to do something. So I think first step has been taken, and more than money, I think the announcement in the Finance Minister's speech that this is one area where national and state government have to take action. I think that's very positive. And at this moment, some startups, one I know is in IIT Chennai, another is Engineering College in Trivandrum, who have taken this activity of mechanized sewage cleaning. I think this will help a lot. And what she said, the Finance Minister said, manholes will become machine holes. I think that was a very important statement, and we need to put it into our startup ecosystem. Second thing, I am now involved with, as an independent director of Gift City, the new financial capital, the proposed new financial capital near Gandhinagar. And I learned from these friends from GIFT that this finance budget, the budget, has provided that the International Financial Services Centers Authority can register new units just like SEZ. And it has also provided a single window registration for IT system for GST, RBI, CP, IRDA, and etc. So we are also, I think I always believe that more than or as important as infrastructure is removing some of the bottlenecks in our systems, which was mentioned earlier. So I think these two are major steps which have been announced in the budget. I also looked at the Sustainable Cities Fund, which was talked about earlier, both in TOD, property tax reform, affordable renting. But I still am not very clear, why did you set up a separate fund? There is already an Amrut program going on. One could have just had a subset of this reform. And if you look at Amrut program, like JNUM, there are 11 reforms, and many of them which are mentioned here are already included in the Amrut program. Rather than monitoring and seeing it to it that those reforms are implemented on the ground, I think this setting up a separate fund. Once again, that fund will be managed by National Housing Bank, who understand very little of urban infrastructure. If it was HUDCO, at least I could have understood that they at least understand what is urban infrastructure, how do they work with municipalities and urban development authorities. But completely you go to a new agency, National Housing Bank, which are focusing on housing and expecting them to support urban infrastructure and second and third tier city. It's I think too much of expectation, and this needs to be, maybe it needs to be reviewed. The fourth point I have is on NULM. I'm surprised that the budget for NULM in the revised budget was 550 crores has been reduced to almost 0.1 crore, which I think is something like 10 lakhs. This is something which has surprised me. I think our urban poor needs much more than this approach. I am not sure why this has been drastically reduced so much. Fortunately, there is a separate program for street vendors, Soumyadip, where there is 460 crores, but street vendors is not the poor, all the poor. I think that is something which needs to be looked into. I also, as you mentioned earlier, there is a huge amount of money going into metro rail systems. And it is something, this is something which needs to be reviewed. Obviously, our major cities, our 10 or 12 cities require metro system. But other cities we should have, as per our national urban transport policy, we should focus on something like BRTS. I think there's too much focus on metro rail systems, and this needs to be reviewed. As far as overall infrastructure program is concerned, I have closely looked at national logistic policy, and I think that is something which is very positive for our urban center. Kala also mentioned this earlier, the importance of logistic supply chain. And I think that national logistic provides a very good beginning, which the Prime Minister has announced. But how do we link up with our urban system is something to be thought of. As far as overall budget is concerned, I think one positive thing about the budget, except NULM, I think everything was predictable. I think that is very positive, that things are not changing overnight, which is very positive on this budget. And last year, ma'am announced this reforms in urban planning system. A committee has already been set up under Mr. Keshav Verma's chairmanship. Also, there's another committee on setting up this centers of excellence in schools of planning, where PSN Rao is chairing that committee, which is extremely positive. I felt that mainstreaming climate change into urban development, though there are things here and there, the scientific management of solid waste, use of green mobility, AI is there, which indirectly will look at climate change and linking it with urban development. But there should have been a little more support for this. And these are my comments. And if required, I can come back later on when other speakers have spoken. Thank you so much, Rumi, for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. That was fascinating. You've shared very useful and important information. I'm sure everybody would have liked it as much as I did. And especially the points about transition from manual to mechanical cleaning of sewers and septic tanks is a very important initiative. Although programs to uplift the life of scavengers have always been there, but a re-emphasis on this and pushing states further into undertaking such important work was, as a reminder, was important. Thank you. We'll certainly come back to you. I would like to move forward in this program and request our third panel speaker, Mr. Tanaji Chakrabarti, who is an urban economist, and I believe has also been visiting School of Planning and Architecture for various academic activities from time to time. Over to you, Mr. Chakrabarti.
Thank you so much, Rumi. You're absolutely correct, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be invited to such an august gathering. And thank you to IMPRI, Professor Soumyadip, yourself, and all the esteemed panelists. I will have very brief points, given that some excellent insights have been provided by Professor Kala and Professor Chetan Vaidya already. So I will go as per the text and the document that was presented in the union budget. Firstly, the significant increase in the PM Awas Yojana is definitely welcome. Obviously, it is something that would boost housing both in rural and urban areas. I think this is something that people do tend to forget, that the increase will impact both the rural and the urban development simultaneously. The policy direction overall in the budget is definitely following the glide path that was already set in the National Urban Mission. Like Professor Vaidya said, no surprises, more or less it is continuing. And the second thing is that the glide path also tallies with whatever infra policy trajectories were defined, especially now with the layering of the Gati Shakti program. But overall, I think what is very important is a prioritized outlay deployment and measurement, which is extremely crucial. As far as the UIDF, which is under NHB, the fund of 10,000 crores per annum, obviously it is for funding infrastructure, but I think it's very heartening to note that there is a very strong focus on tier 2 and 3 cities. For those of you who remember our discussions last year, exactly this time, this very IMPRI budget discussion, it was actually mentioned that there should be a focus on tier 2 and 3 cities. And it seems to have been kind of incorporated in that way. Moreover, it does seem like Professor Kala mentioned that it's a seed fund for initiating and obviously crowding in private sector investment, and one can only wait and see how that pans out. The property tax on the finance side, the property tax and governance reforms, ring fencing of user charges on urban infrastructure, and municipal bonds for improving credit worthiness. Obviously, all steps in the right direction. I think it is the beginning of a systematic effort to rationalize urban finance system, which is very much required because, as all of us are aware, there have been municipal bond issues by some cities, some of which have been quite successful, but that needs to pan out and indeed percolate to many other cities, not only the tier 1, but tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. Because urban finance, without urban finances coming into play, incentive or subsidy-based urban development would not be self-sustaining over a period of time. There is one very interesting provision which was mentioned, that is that the government has capped deduction from capital gains on investment in residential house to rupees 10 crores, which would only be, seems to be impacting the top end of the residential market and the affordable housing, etc. These segments may be relatively unaffected. I will break down from an urban economics point of view the impact on the demand side and the cost side and supply side. So on the demand side, it's likely to be sluggish, especially in the residential mid-market zone and the affordable segment because of successive rate hikes. And one is yet to see what kind of incentives are going to come through in the disposable income side. So overall, the thinking is that it may be sluggish, and there is definitely a heightened demand that is anticipated for industrial, distribution, and manufacturing infra. And accordingly, I think all cities, that Professor Kala mentioned, tier 1 cities where logistics companies go to. But I mean, apart from that, due to the requirements of e-commerce, etc., there are a lot of these companies which are actually per force having to go to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And I think the Gati Shakti only ties in all of these things together. On the cost side, there is a genuine concern because the rising key construction and input material costs, which is expected hopefully to kind of plateau out in maybe after 18 to 24, 30 months. But at the present moment, it may not cushion the increasing capital values in urban markets, especially given the scenario of global headwinds. So overall, just to close, I think it's more or less a budget which is following the trajectories that were set up earlier. There are many many points that particular groups or particular interests within the urban development sector, especially the private, may have asked for. But from a policy perspective, I think there's a lot, which is helpful in pushing forward the National Urban Mission, which was set out quite a few years earlier. I'll close at that, and if there are any questions, I will take it on later. Rumi, thanks to you. Over to you.
Thank you, Tanaji. And the point that you began with is quite relevant in the sense that the overall allocation for the housing program of India, PMAY, is significant. And you are right in saying that if the situation in urban areas improves, it will reduce the pressure that's being created on our cities. So thanks a lot for your views and remarks on this year's budget. I would like to invite now Professor Mahalaya Chatterjee, who is with the Calcutta University, to present her views.
Sir, Professor Alok has to leave.
He has to leave?
Yeah, something has come up in his institute, so we can have his remarks.
Okay, with apologies to Professor Chatterjee, I would like to invite Professor V.N. Alok to share his views on this year's budget.
Thank you, Dr. Aijaz. In fact, the Army Chief is going to join us very soon, the Chief of Army Staff. So I'm not leaving because of anybody else. And thank you for having invited me. I'm thankful to IMPRI and ORF, and particularly to Mr. Rumi Aijaz, Mr. Soumyadip, and the Director IMPRI. I just wanted to make just 10 points here, and most of them have been covered already. So I'll be very, very brief in this. My only point which I wanted to emphasize here, since urban, as Dr. Kala has said, is a state subject. So the most important thing which I see for the urban sector is the 50 years interest-free loan to the states, right? And some of this is conditional, and those conditional things are linked to certain purposes. And those purposes includes many of the things which fall under the urban sector. That is scrapping of old government vehicles, urban planning and reforms, as Professor Chetan Vaidya mentioned about this, financing reforms in municipalities to make them credit worthy for municipal bond, which is one thing which we think that things are going to be there in future. We can see RBI is coming up and some data so far as the municipal corporations are concerned. And the fourth is the housing for police personnel, right? Close to the police stations, and construction of the unity malls, children's libraries and digital infrastructures, and state share that has been announced in the capital expenditure so far the schemes are concerned. So these are some of the things which is there, for the urban sector, the money that is being allocated as loans to the states, interest-free loans, the next 50 years or so. The skeptics can certainly say that the state will not be able to spend that money because this last year figure is not so encouraging. And you have to make states to spend that money so far as the capital expenditure is concerned. Now, I'm going back to what Dr. Rumi Aijaz has mentioned about the announcement and the centrally sponsored schemes. Certainly, some of the schemes, there's a big announcement, and the other schemes are full, like the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, National Urban Livelihood Mission. This has been almost scrapped. Okay, so from 550 crores last year, that's the RE figure, the B figure is almost nil. The PMAY, the scheme which is financed from the Central Road and Infrastructure Fund, this is again a big cut there in this schemes. So that is something one can be worried about. And as Rumi has mentioned, Smart Cities Mission, again, there is a cut from 8,800 to just 8,000. There is a big increase so far as the Swachh Bharat mission is concerned, from 2,000 crores to 5,000 crores. And in this, I could see, since this is going to be an election year, I think the government might be thinking of spending some money on advertisements and others. May not be on the other aspect, but on the advertisements and other things. So I think there is something one can read between the lines, that from 2,000 to 5,000 crores, this could be for advertisements. And of course, as mentioned, Amrit schemes, there is an increase from 6,500 crores to 8,000 crores. So that is all about the centrally sponsored schemes. There are other announcements that has been mentioned earlier, making cities ready for municipal bond, as I mentioned. So the government wanted the involvement of all other agencies, including SEBIs and others, and the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund, which has been mentioned earlier. But I feel it's a good step, because this is focus on the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Okay, so that is something which one can welcome. And then urban sanitations, as Professor Chetan Vaidya has emphasized quite strongly, from main hole to machine hole mode. This exercise is started by Sulabh, the private sector organization. The government is getting into this. So I think this is a very, very big step. The government is thinking on that line. I believe state will also be. And then the Govardhan schemes. So that is also an important scheme. This has been mentioned earlier. So that is point number 5. Point number 6 is the Center for Excellence for Artificial Intelligence. This is an important aspect because we all know the kind of advancement that is taking place, or the technology is concerned. We need to establish these kind of centers. And then the regional connectivities, many of the airports have been planned. And my last is the Unity model. So I just stop it here. Thank you very much once again for having invited me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Alok. It was interesting to listen to your thoughts about this year's budget and your reflection of the implications for various schemes that are ongoing in the country. I would like to move to the next panel speaker, Professor Mahalaya Chatterjee, who is with the Calcutta University, to come forward and present her views.
My previous speakers have covered most of the points about the budget. I would like to confine to the budget document itself, and the total allocation to urban sector, that is to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, is about 76,431 crore of rupees. That is the total allocation. But if you look at this point by point at what is happening and what is happening, you see that there is some divisions about the allocation. Firstly, it starts with something called code of the code, but there is not a single project related to urban in this core of the code things. It finds a place, that is the whatever it is, PMAY, National Urban Livelihood Mission, Swachh Bharat, Amrut, whatever be is in the core projects. Core project, that is, and if you look at the ministry-wise allocation, urban is not even, that is Ministry of Housing and Urban Development is not even in the first scale. First scale, of course, it starts with the Ministry of Defense, and the allocation to Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs goes to about 11th or 12th in terms of allocation. So whatever we talk, we people interested in urban, doing research in urban, etc., whatever we talk, we see that the priority of the government is not that what it should be. It should be, as we have already seen, that the national, it's not, urban is not about infrastructure only. You are allocating much money on infrastructure. You are thinking of a new fund, Urban Infrastructure Development Fund, which will be under the Investment Secretariat, Infrastructure Secretariat. It will be managed by National Housing Bank. The states will have access to it through going through the considerations. I am not very sure whether this is a new model replacing the PPP model, because as I have said that these tier 2 and tier 3 cities will be getting infrastructure through this fund, through public agencies. Public agencies, so is it a departure from the PPP model? I'm not very sure. That is not very clear in the so-called budget, at least in the budget speech. I agree with Kala that everything cannot be understood from the budget speech, because budget speech is just one thing, and different type of policies and other projects, etc., they are being announced throughout the year. So budget is just an indicator of the priorities of the government and nothing else. So, and if we say that this government has a tendency of naming and making the acronyms sensitized and others. So it is sometimes it becomes very difficult to understand that whether it is a new thing or something old in a new bottle. That is one of the problems. And sometimes we say that we are going from some long-term things. If you remember, there was an urban policy framework which was announced in 2018. But with pandemic and others, we forgot about this NUPF. So whatever is done, that is allocation with increase for some, PMOI, it's increased, National Urban Livelihood Mission, it is decreased and so on. Some transport infrastructure, but if I remember correctly, that this National Urban Policy Framework that emphasized on resource-oriented urbanization rather than transit-oriented urbanization, transit-oriented development, because transit-oriented development leads to some sort of leapfrogging, wastage of resources and others. But in this year's budget speech, it is specifically mentioned that transit-oriented development. So it calls for more coordination among the ministries as far as urban thing is concerned, because I have said earlier, I am repeating it earlier, that urban is a multi-dimensional thing. Whatever you do in through other ministries, through transport ministry, through even through other things, its effect is on the urban itself. So that is one point I'm trying to make, that if it is about urban, please try to understand the links, that what effect it will have on the urban thing, PM Gati Shakti. If it is really right, that if it is really the logistics and others are being developed for tier 2 and tier 3 cities, what effect it will have on the so-called primate cities, which Kala very rightly emphasized, that I come from West Bengal and primacy is highest in West Bengal as far as Kolkata is concerned, but it is no less in other states, as she said about Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh as examples. But if the communication with the tier 2 and tier 3 cities being developed, will that lead to more investment by the private sector in these cities, or improved communication with the main city, with the capital city or the primate city, will lead to some other types of backwash effect? Backwash effect in terms of other infrastructure, like say social structure infrastructure, like investment in schools, private authorities, or healthcare facilities. Healthcare facilities, they see that people will have easier access to bigger cities. That is one of my concerns. Urban sanitation, making machine holes is purely a welcome move. It should have been done much earlier, and it should also spread to other concerns of Swachh Bharat. Manual scavenging and other things, they should be discouraged, but not to forget the employment aspect of it. Then the governance for circular economy. And now every time we talk about all these things, it is mentioned that 75 of the compressed biogas plants, 75 will be in urban areas. Now, isn't 75 a very small number if you think of 7,000 urban areas in India? And unfortunately, we talk about biogas and others, but when it comes to the question of cleaner fuels and others, we forget about that, and again we go back to LPG, Ujjwala Yojana and others. So I think that 75 is a too small number. If we really want to go for recycling, we want to go for circular economy and others, there should be more emphasis on biofuel and compressed biogas plants, not only in the peri-urban areas, not only in the rural areas, but also in bigger urban areas. In bigger urban areas, we never see anything like compressed biogas plants or anything else. And that implies to solar plants also. Unfortunately, this budget hardly have any mention to solar power. Solar power. Then two more things. One is about municipal bonds. Now, when in the 90s, especially in the late 90s, we used to speak about municipal bonds. We used to speak about pooled bonds. But for 20 years, we have forgotten about it. I cannot say of any city which has financed itself through municipal bonds, starting from Ahmedabad to smaller cities in Tamil Nadu, smaller cities and towns in Tamil Nadu. When we are talking about making cities ready for municipal bonds, actually what type of readiness we are trying to put on them will not be this be another problem, another thing which will again fuel up this top heavy urbanization thing the country is suffering from. What the smaller cities and towns will do in case municipal bonds become the major way to finance urban infrastructure and carry on the urban functions. So let me stop here. Maybe I will tell more at the time of discussion. Thank you once again, IMPRI and others for inviting me.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. That was a very balanced presentation, and your reflections on various aspects of the budget and the challenges that exist in the country, especially the point about how difficulties and what kind of difficulties would be faced in taking these policy statements forward, given the limitations that exist in urban areas, is welcome. These remarks are very useful and good. Thank you very much. And I would like to now invite the next panel speaker, who has been waiting patiently, Professor Tathagata Chatterjee, who is with the Xavier University in Bhubaneswar.
Thank you, Dr. Rumi, and thank you, Dr. Soumyadip and Dr. Arjun for inviting me. It is really an honor to be part of this discussion. The previous speakers has touched most of the issues. So taking off from there, I would like to flag two larger policy trends that this budget articulates and which could possibly have huge repercussions for the urban sector in future. Firstly, I see that there is a clear thrust on infrastructure, which others had also said. But the budget has also had announced 60,000 crore for public funds and another 15,000 crores of through PPP, etc. for the last mile critical infrastructure connectivity for ports and goods terminals, linked to the PM Gati Shakti and supplemented by another huge thrust on roads and railways. So these infrastructure investments are largely going to come to the cities or to their extended metropolitan regions. So when you are connecting a port to a city or to a railway interchange, you are not, you are already extending, I mean, these are the places which are situated in the larger metropolitan belt of the city regions. So that is certainly going to trigger a very large scale urbanization in these areas, whether that is in the existing tier 1 city or in the tier 2 or tier 3 city. That is a matter that needs to be seen as it develops. Secondly, there is a lot of reference to green growth, which is definitely a good thing. On a concrete term, I see that there is a big ticket announcement of rupees 35,000 crore towards energy transition. Now, how this is going to be allocated, we need to see that. It is expected that bulk of these are going to go to the oil companies. But I mean, it is expected that, I mean, this could fuel or facilitate a move towards cleaner fuel usage and renewable energy. And if that happens, there is also a move towards green hydrogen. So if this green transition happens, this could also have a very significant urban dimension impacting climate change aspects. Now, thirdly, coming specifically to the urban sector, many other speakers have already mentioned about Professor Chetan Vaidya and others had already mentioned about the mechanical desludging. So that is definitely a very welcome step. And as Professor Mahala has also mentioned, this should have been done earlier. So definitely this is a very important step that has finally been taken. But then I come to another point which Professor Chetan Vaidya has raised, that is about the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund, and which is likely to be established in the lines of the Rural Infrastructure Development Funds through the use of priority sector lending shortfall with an allocation of another 10,000 crore per annum. So there is a it is being said that this fund is going to be used for infrastructure development in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. This is definitely an interesting development, but the question that comes to me here, that are we seeing with the establishment of the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund, are we seeing the end of mission mode programs like Amrut and the smart cities? Smart cities, the budget has been going down, and recently there was also a statement somewhere that the smart cities mission would be coming to an end, perhaps towards the middle of this year. But then there is Amrut, which has got some amount of extra funding this year. But are we then moving from these mission mode programs to this Urban Infrastructure Development Fund? Now, there could be a positive aspect of that, because I mean, if we move towards an infrastructure development fund, this can provide greater flexibility to the cities. One problem with the mission mode programs is that, that they tend to trigger a supply-led growth instead of demand-led growth. And also there is always a lot of time pressure to complete projects, or complete the planning before the deadline of the mission, and which is always very short. So if there is a transition towards an urban infrastructure development fund, that could possibly be a good thing. But of course, as Chetan Vaidya has mentioned, we need to see how the institutional architecture of that comes up. The fourth point that I would like to mention is that the finance minister has last year has also mentioned, and this year had also mentioned about the need for urban planning reforms and action plans regarding efficient land use, adequate resource for infrastructure, TOD, increased availability of urban land, etc. Including, property tax reforms and raising of ring fencing, the word she used, and raising of user fees. Now, the question is, what would be the modality of this encouragement? That we need to see, because all these issues are in the domain of the state governments and could be politically extremely challenging, especially, when there are opposition ruled states. So, earlier, when there was an Amrut program, or before that, Jain and NIUA, which has got a carrot and stick approach that if you carry on certain reforms, you are going to get additional funds. So how these reforms are going to be incentivized, that remains a question. Could it be done through the Urban Infrastructure Fund? So, this, I think, is a point we need to discuss in the panel discussion. Okay, with this, I stop for now, and I'll be happy to take part in the answer other questions during the panel discussion.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee, for your views and your reflections on different items described in the budget. I would like to now invite the final speaker in today's program, Mr. Tarun Sharma, who is co-founder with Nagrika. Over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you, Dr. Aijaz, and thanks, Dr. Arjun Kumar and the IMPRI team for inviting me to this gathering. And thanks to the fellow panelists and discussant who've enlightened about the budget that has just been presented. I find myself quite out of depth in terms of, I am a small towner. I am a citizen of a small city. I live in Dehradun. And I'm just very happy to be on this panel, which has a lot of collective wisdom over probably something which is the single most important fiscal event that happens every year, and to which a citizen of a small city also takes note of. To be honest, I have not been a very regular follower of the union budgets, but in the last few years, and I think especially the budget speeches, they have started to speak specifically about cities, and I think a lot of people have started taking note of the budget after it has been transformed in a way that it speaks to common citizens as well. And even though we started very concerted efforts in the urban domain in India since the in a much more concrete way since JNNURM, still for the longest time, I think the budgets did not bring out the importance of the cities in our growth trajectory or the consequences of our growth trajectory for our cities. And I think in the last few years, it has become quite apparent. So, I'm not here as an expert or a person who has analyzed the budget with a lot of nuance. I am not an economist or public finance specialist. I'm an ordinary citizen. I'm hopefully able to share that perspective. Now, I was just thinking about the overall budget speech, and Ms. Sitaraman took close to 90 minutes to lay out a plan to spend close to 45 lakh crores. And just as an aggregate solely for urban related outlays, and I think the Ministry of Housing has about 76,000 crores. And then there are other mix. I think even if we put it as say 1 lakh crores, the amount she in a way dedicated to cities in her speech was about 2 minutes. So of course, I'm oversimplifying this because there are many other outlays in the budget which have a significant urban footprint and which are scattered across the budget speech. But still, I think that is something that as a benchmark shows the relative importance that the cities have gotten in the budget. Now, budget does talk about really big money, and it might be useful to understand the size of money in a person's context, especially in a smaller city, which I'm trying to represent. Like for an urban household in a small city, numbers in thousands, one with 3 zeros, are monthly expenditures or savings. And when it comes to lakhs, people are already talking about annual incomes for the entire year. And within that annual income, also people are hoping to get some relief in terms of tax breaks. So when a budget announces that almost 10,000 crores are going to be given every year to develop such cities, for a citizen from such a city, it's difficult to put the head around and understand that how it actually would look like. It's probably similar for smaller city governments also, whose budgets are, as compared to the national budget, quite tiny. Like for the city of Dehradun, 2.5 crores is the amount that is there to maintain our roads. Or even when there is a scheme which is worth 45 crores, which is awarded to fix, say, 10 kilometers within a city. So 10,000 crores, or the number of the numbers that are presented in the union budget are quite large. But I was trying to inform myself a bit with the numbers that are included in the budget and bring it down to the level of city. And I was looking at the capex that BMC has, the Bombay Municipal Corporation. And what I saw was that it has a capex of almost 27,000 crores. And this capex is almost 3 times the size of the overall money allocated under this urban infrastructure development fund for tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So just one city. That's the amount of capex that BMC already has. And so I think one of the points through all of this, what I want to make is that while there is a lot of positive when adequately talked about aspects in this budget, which my fellow distinguished panelists have talked about, high spending on capex and support to infrastructure, urban planning reforms, and improving financial standing of the cities. One aspect that I think we need to look with a keen eye is that how this money will be spent at the local level of tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Previous cities have resulted in mixed outcomes, and these outcomes depend on the kind of political and administrative leadership that exists in smaller cities. But still, I find it quite incredible that there is an explicit mention of small and intermediate cities in the budget, because while close to 90% of non-metros, and as all of you would know, the kind of tired classification we have for our cities, we have class 1, class 2, and within class 1 we have metros which are million plus, and then we have the non-metros which are between 1 lakh and 10 lakh. So in the larger schemes that we have been implementing, Amrit, Smart Cities, Swachh Bharat, a lot of class 1 cities have been represented, and within Amrit, close to 90% of non-metros, which are cities between 1 lakh and 10 lakh, they are represented. But within smart cities, which were total 100 smart cities, only 13%, about 12 to 13%, this Nagrik had done this analysis at some point, there are only 12 to 13% of non-metros, the cities between 1 lakh and 10 lakh, are represented in smart city programs. So when we come to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, that number is even larger. That's close to 2,000 cities. So I think there is indeed a lot of scope for such cities to come under the ambit of urban programs. And I think this year's budget is just a beginning to get that kind of explicit mention. Also, I was reflecting on the budget cuts and the continuity of the budget, and about PMAY and NULM and the increase on Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. And there can be multiple ways to look at it, but one way in which I see this allocation towards these programs is probably tied also with the kind of functions that cities have traditionally been performing. And we had done an analysis with another organization where we had mapped all the 18 functions in all 28 states at the ground level. We had gone to the municipalities across 28 states to see that how these cities are actually performing the 18 functions that have been devolved as per the 74th Amendment. And the one function, which probably doesn't require much of thinking, that traditionally has been with all kinds of cities is, maintenance of cleanliness and sanitation, waste collection, waste segregation. And so that function has been there with the cities for the longest time. And a lot of cities, while we were trying to understand the role that city governments were directly playing in social sector schemes like PMAY or NULM, that role was very limited. So in a way, I think continuation and augmentation of the funds under Swachh Bharat can be seen as maybe giving additional capacity to cities in performing the function that they have been performing for a very long time. And I think PMAY and NULM, these schemes, for the longest time, they were being supported very to a larger extent by the state departments and by the national funding. So in a way, one could also see that that support has been taken away. But there is also another observation that I had about the union budget as a lay citizen is my perception of the priorities of a national level budget. And I think in the last few years, there has been, the budget has had shown some respect to the overall process of urbanization in the country. Because for the longest time, the budgets were addressing symptomatic issues and had a sectoral focus on housing or infrastructure or sanitation. But since last few years, including this year, there seems to be at least an intent to understand the building blocks of urban forces, whether it was the last year's announcement of reimagining urban planning, or this year's focus on sustainability, or creating a consolidated fund to look at a much larger scale of cities in terms of UIDF, or even very simple thing that they did with the TULIP program, where they announced a program to employ fresh graduates to work with city governments. I think there seems to be intent at the national level budget to come down to the level of the cities and to identify the forces that it needs to work with. Then another point is about continuity. I think one thing that as a citizen from a small city that I have seen in the last few year budgets is the continuity. There has been, like, this is other than the continuity in terms of the funding amount might have changed, but there has been a relative continuity in terms of the schemes and policies that most major policy have received continued support. And it's not just within the urban program, but also other major ministry programs that are relevant to cities, including in the realm of skill building or health or education. Most of them have been continuing in the last few years. And I believe that the beginnings that have been made this year would also be continued with the application of sound economic and practical reasoning. But since NULM is being, in principle, discontinued, or the funding support has reduced, I hope that the aspects that worked within NULM are still continued. The budget mentions about economic empowerment of women through SHGs, specifically in the context of NRLM. But a lot of this muscle had been created through NULM in multiple states. And I hope that when we are talking about Nari Shakti and women empowerment and creation of jobs and livelihoods in cities, that element of NULM is considered and is taken forward. As an aggregate, I do feel that budgetary allocation for smaller cities have increased over the last few years, directly or indirectly. And I hope that this funding support is continued, and it is mapped not to the performance alone, but also with the capacity to perform. One last point, which I think is probably a point about which a lot of widespread and large-scale discussion needs to happen, is about UIDF. And Professor Vaidya talked about the capacity of NHB, and I think others also referred to the institutional arrangements that can allow for effective utilization and creation of this kind of fund. And I think I was looking at the RIDF, the Rural Infrastructure Development Fund, and on the basis of which the UIDF has been conceived. And I hope that the learnings from RIDF and from its conception and from its performance are taken. And one of the things that caught my eye was that some of the most rural states in India have not been tapping into RIDF. In fact, it's the largely urbanized states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, and others, and Tamil Nadu, which have been tapping into a lot of RIDF funds, the rural development funds. So I think one of the learnings that while we are trying to create the UIDF and creating the sectoral allocations and targeting, one of the things that the decision makers should look at is the targeting. And it should also have adequate funds. And I was just looking at the funding in smart cities, and within the round one cities, the 20 around 1 cities which had a head start of sorts, the value of completed projects is close to 20,000 crores. And those projects which are in tender stages is close to 11,000 crores. And we are talking about 10,000 crores per year for all tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And this number is only for 20 cities. And so in terms of, I think, funding, I think this would be critical to design the sectoral mix which is allowed within the UIDF. Because within the RIDF, we had 3 large sectors, agricultural activities and social sector and connectivity. So while we are looking at designing the sectors and the programs that are allowed within UIDF, there can be a lot of learning from the existing programs that we have been implementing, including smart cities, because smart city in the last 5 to 7 years has given us a lot of retrospective learning in terms of which programs, which kind of projects have worked and have not worked. And that learning should be created while this UIDF is created. And I think I will, and with UIDF, I think, as Professor Tathagat also mentioned, I think it can give a lot of opportunity to create demand-led growth in smaller cities. And also, yeah, the other aspect is that RIDF has both positives and criticisms in terms of working with local organizations, working with local NGOs and SHGs. And I think that local capacity in tier 2 and tier 3 cities exists. And while the funding to create infrastructure and create projects of social value is channeled in smaller cities, I think this local capacity should be tapped into. So I think I will stop at that. And if there are any questions or further comments, I'll be happy to join in later.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for your good remarks. In fact, I wanted to ask you about the work that your organization is engaged in. And you've nicely covered it in your talk. About the studies that you've conducted from time to time, and what are the lessons that you're learning from those studies. So thank you once again for participating and sharing your views. Now we are into the next section of this program, and that is the section on discussion or question and answer session. If there are any questions that the participants would like to ask, this is the time to do so. We can take a few questions. Okay, so it seems that the participants were fully satisfied with the remarks made by the panel speakers, and they are absolutely clear about the budget document than what they were before joining the session. We can have the way forward if our organizer agree with this, that there can be some closing remarks from each one of us. If there are some that come to the mind, Professor Vaidya, you may like to add something after listening to all the speakers.
I think all speakers have made very important points, and what I think is coming out very clearly that the budget is predictable. Its announcement for focusing on small and medium towns is very positive. But there are lessons learned both from Smart City, Amrut, and the one mentioned by Mr. Sharma from Dehradun on this rural infrastructure fund. So how can we utilize? And that point which one of them was mentioning, that is it time to shift from mission mode to program-oriented approach? And I personally am a very strong believer that you need programs rather than projects. But for programs to succeed, we also need successful projects, because India wants to see success before they believe policy. So I think that is, Sangeeta, that was a point you should remember, that if we write only policies, that's not going to happen. And if we only do pilots, it doesn't happen. You need to work on both together. And that is the approach, I think, the balancing act, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, as well as the Finance Ministry is doing. With that, I'll stop at that. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Rumi.
Thank you, sir. I believe Professor V.N. Alok had to go for another activity, so I will ask Mr. Tanaji Chakrabarti if he has some closing remarks.
Thank you, Rumi. Very quickly, I think it was a very enriching discussion. And also the kind of work that is being done by all of us on the panel, and also what I heard of the work being done by Nagarika is really encouraging, because it means that there are various ways of checks and balances on where not only where the policy is headed, but actually what is the impact which is happening from the policy initiatives that are being taken. I would like to reiterate what I mentioned in the last year's panel discussion, which is any approach towards comprehensively addressing India's urban economic issues and questions and trying to find solutions should be multidisciplinary. I think we have spent decades trying to understand from our own respective silos, whether that is economics or planning or design, and having spent almost a couple of decades teaching design and planning students of project finance and economics, I think it is now time that all of us collaborate and come on to a platform which addresses and tries to understand these issues from a holistic and a multidisciplinary standpoint. At which point I would like to leave a kind of a query, because last budget, I think there was an announcement for an institute or a center of excellence in planning. I'm not sure what is the outcome of that. If somebody can give an idea, it will be nice. That will be my closing comments. Thank you again, Rumi and Dr. Arjun and Dr. Soumyadip for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chakrabarti. Professor Kala Sridhar, would you like to say something before we close?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Certainly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rumi, for this opportunity. What I would like to emphasize is that it's only very recently that national governments in their budget pronouncements have started to talk about local issues, which is really very encouraging for urban researchers, right? However, there seems to be a little bit of confusion in this budget regarding what the national government should handhold and what the local government should micromanage. And I think the finance minister said scientific management of dry and wet waste is needed, for example, which is, I think, correct. But that is such a local issue that I think national governments have no role to play in that. It's only best implemented at the local level only. If you take something like transit-oriented development or town planning, the local governments and the states, they need hand-holding. That is where the national government needs to give some overall implementable framework within which they can formulate more sustainable policies. So this is the kind of national, state, local kind of dichotomy, and who needs to do what in a federal structure that needs to be clarified and understood further in the national budget making process. And I think that is one thing that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Mahalaya Chatterjee, your concluding thoughts, if you would like to say.
Yes, I also believe that urban is a multidisciplinary thing. As I was saying, what is happening in other sectors will definitely have its impact on the urban sector. And we have to understand these flows and linkages. Otherwise, our urban planning is going to fail as it has failed before. Whatever reform we are thinking about, may not yield much result if we do not understand the flows and linkages the urban sector have with other sectors. Professor Tathagata Chattopadhyay has talked about that investment in ports, transport projects and others will have its impact on the urban. So that is the thing, that is we should increase our understanding about these linkage effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. Now to Professor Tathagata Chatterjee, your concluding thoughts, if you would have any.
Yeah, so one Chatterjee to another Chatterjee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's good. One point, regarding the NULM, I think, we need to see this decline of NULM that was kind of written in the wall. Even after the pandemic, when there was a huge issue about migrant people moving from returning to their home cities, we did not see any appreciable increase in NULM budget. And this year, there had also been very substantial cut in the MGNREG, which is a far, far bigger program compared to NULM. So we need to see this cut in NULM in the larger political economy ideas of the current government. But here, I think, there is some kind of a dichotomy between the priorities of the national government and that of the state governments. So here in Odisha, for example, the Odisha state government has implemented a Mukta scheme, which is a urban wage employment scheme, and similar schemes have been implemented in several other states like Himachal, by Rajasthan, etc. So here, the state governments are going more for the welfare schemes, whereas the national government is going more towards big ticket, big infra kind of an approach. So there is a dichotomy between the priorities of the central government vis-a-vis that of the state government. So there is a dynamics there in the federal polity in India. But having said that, National Urban Livelihood Mission, the scheme itself, I personally tracked the performance of the National Urban Livelihood Mission in Odisha, the small towns in Odisha. What we found that, even though the scheme was well intended, its implementation was kind of very problematic. And the capturing of the local level data was not really very much up to the mark. So I think, I think personally, my personal feeling is that we need to have a better designed livelihood scheme. And particularly when we see there is a huge rise in urban informal sector activities. Yeah, with this I'd like to stop.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. Mr. Tarun Sharma, I would not like to leave you also. I would also like to give you this opportunity if you have any concluding thought to make.
Yeah, maybe I'll just consolidate on the multiple points that I talked about. And I think in conclusion, I would just say that the latest budget does offer a lot of promise for small and intermediate cities, the lower rung of the tier 1 cities and tier 2 and tier 3 cities. But I think it'll be important to remember that the success of a lot of these initiatives will depend on their implementation at the local level. And I think this is a point that a lot of us have stressed. And the budget's emphasis on urban planning reforms, sustainability, and capacity building is a step in the right direction. But I think it needs to be seen that how some of these promises will be fulfilled in practice. But it's my hope that this budget and the multiple steps at the national level, at the state level, and the capacity at the local level will lead to a more integrated and holistic approach to urbanization in India. with a focus on the building blocks of urban forces and the needs of small intermediate cities as well. And I think with the right leadership support and resources, I think these cities have the potential to thrive and play a very significant role in shaping the future of India. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sharma. From my side, now we are coming towards the end of the program. I won't take much time before I hand it to the organizer, Dr. Soumyadip and Dr. Arjun Kumar. I have one or two points to make before I conclude. One is about the basis which is considered for arriving at these amounts allocated for different ministries. In this case, the urban ministry. Although I'm sure there is a basis, the center would be working closely with the state governments and the union territories to arrive at the budgetary amount that is fixed for the urban sector. But there should be some transparency in this process of sharing with the community, sharing with everyone as to what has been the basis for arriving at this amount for the urban sector. The point here is that there are so many inequalities that exist in the country. There are so many adversities. There are many gaps. The quality of life in many places is direly in need of improvement. And if those inequalities are not being considered year after year, then is it due to less amount of funds being allocated for various challenges that exist in urban areas? So that's one point that comes to my mind. The second point is about the utilization of funds. When you try and appraise some of these schemes that are run by the center or the centrally sponsored schemes such as Amrut or Smart Cities Mission, etc., you notice that very often delays have been reported in the transfer of funds from the central government to the states and union territories, which affects the timely implementation of various projects and schemes that the center or the state governments are trying to do to transform their cities. So how to make the administration or the administrative agencies, the municipalities, more accountable, more transparent. I think more importance needs to be given to this aspect also, because ultimately citizens have huge expectations from budget. And whenever you listen to some discussions, then people say that many of their grievances have not been given attention to in the budget. So 2 points from my side. And now I would like to hand over the platform to the organizers, if Dr. Soumyadip has something to say, and to Dr. Arjun. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Rumi. And really, it is very much interesting as well as enlightening for me to listen to the thoughts of the distinguished panelists on this year's budget. And what it seems to me that at least from this discussion, there are two important takeaways. One is the departure from this metro centricity. That means for the first time, or there are certain specific mentioning of tier 2 and tier 3 cities and some of the smaller cities. And also another important aspect is the departure from these sectoral approaches to some of the comprehensive urban reforms. And but as far as the urban reforms are concerned, like yes, all these are very good ideas. Like all of our speakers, they have mentioned the kind of urban reforms which are announced in this year's budget. These are all very good ideas, but to operate them successfully, I think remains a huge challenge in the context of the Indian cities. And what I think is that to very basic things which are going to be very much crucial is the capacity building and also the availability of local data. These are going to be very crucial if we want to really make some evidence-based urban policy making and to enrich our entire discussion. So I hope that IMPRI will take forward today's discussion, and we are going to have many more this kind of discussions on how to make our cities livable, how to make our cities inclusive, how to make our cities sustainable, and all these things. So we are really look forward to have this kind of discussion more in the near future. So that's all from my end. So now it's over to the IMPRI team.
Bhanvi. So Bhanvi will give a formal vote of thanks. Bhanvi, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, sir. So, as we come to the end of today's enlightening discussion, I, Bhanvi, researcher, IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, for today's deliberation. A panel discussion on cities and union budget 2023-24. We are grateful to our chair and moderator, Dr. Rumi Aijaz and Dr. Soumyadip Chattopadhyay, and panelists Professor Chetan Vaidya, Professor Vishwanatha, Professor T. Chakravarti, Professor Tathagata Chatterjee, Professor Mahalya Chatterjee, Professor Kala Sitaram Sridhar, Mr. Tarun Sharma, for taking part and enlightening us. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. You may also find more discussions in our IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of Cities, #Cities Conversation, and other thematic series. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We also invite you to IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget, financial year 2023-24, being organized from February 2 to 7, 2023. Wishing you a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you.
Thanks, IMPRI and others.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye for now.